You can do banking, you can pay your bills, and you can even date online. It's very strange, isn't it? My wife Megan has, I think, 4 college friends who have been married through eharmony.com. They've met people through eHarmony. That has made things simpler, actually. That is one of the better things about the internet. The internet seems to have made our lives simpler, hasn't it? Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. And here's the ultimate one, okay? Here's my final one that I've thought about how we've made our lives simpler. Who's been to Walmart this week? You can get anything you want at a super Walmart, and it's at the lowest price ever, isn't it? But then again, you have to fight through the crowds in the parking lot and everything else. So is it really simpler to go through Walmart? But here's my favorite one from Walmart. Who's been through the self-checkouts lately? Who's brave enough to go through the self-checkouts? I remember going through it. I hated it. It was one of the worst experiences I ever had in my life. I went up, and I think there's a little devil inside that box that's making me not want to do it. It was not good. Put your money in. Don't I have to scan things first? Okay, so that's not how it works. You scan it, rescan, put it in the bag. Okay. The self-checkouts at Walmart are meant to make life simpler. Boy, do they make me frustrated. How about you guys? I go through this whole line, I go through the self-checkout, I'm like, yep, that was a waste of 15 minutes. I could have gone through that line and waited behind 4 people, and it would have been much faster. But it's saving Walmart thousands of dollars a year. So they make life simpler for us. Sometimes we try to simplify our lives, and in actuality, what do? We make it more complicated, don't we? By the show of hands here today, I think we have a few of us that want our lives to be simpler. Many of us take part in these attempts. We go through drive-thrus, we go on the internet, we go to Walmart because we have to. We try all these things that try to make our lives a little simpler, but the fact is this. You all wanted your lives to be simpler, right? How many of you feel like your life is chaotic, crazy, and just complicated? I'm there all the time. I was happy when they called me about, 3 months ago to come and preach this weekend. I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. I'm happy to come on out. But I didn't know that a good friend who was 93 years old from our church would pass away last week, and I had to do the funeral yesterday. So am I feeling a little stressed and complicated? My life is complicated. And every week is like that, isn't it? However much we try to simplify our lives, it always gets complicated. It always gets crazy. It's always too much going on, it seems like, doesn't it? We want our lives to be simple, but our lives are just the opposite. Now, I'm asking all these questions because we read this thing from Matthew. Does any of that seem simple? Does any of that stuff we just read, okay, I got all that other junk out of the way, our lives simple and everything, but what about what Jesus was just saying? Does that seem simple to you? Jesus is talking about mothers against sons, sons against fathers, fathers-in-law, mothers-in-law, daughters-in-law, and mothers-in-law. How are those relationships going for all of you? It seems so complicated. Jesus says, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. He talks about sparrows worth a penny. He talks about, the hairs of your head and all these things. And I'm thinking, man, Jesus, this seems really complicated. It seems really complicated to follow you, Jesus. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to follow you? It's supposed to be simple, isn't it? I want my Christian life to be as simple as I'm trying to make my life be. And it seems like Jesus is kind of complicating matters. Jesus has a way of doing that, doesn't he? Sometimes when I try reading the Bible, I don't get it either until I read something that makes sense. Jesus says this, and this makes sense to me. It seems simple. He says, whoever loves father or mother more than me isn't worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me isn't worthy of me. And whoever doesn't take up your cross and follow me isn't worthy of me. Is that simple enough for you? How many of you love your parents? Get those hands up. You better love them. And those of you who have children, you have to love your children, don't you? Jesus isn't saying, don't love your parents, don't love your family. But how many of you love your family, your parents, your children more than you love God? I know there are times that I do. There are times that I would rather spend time with Elizabeth, who's just learning to crawl, and I find her 5 steps up the steps the other day, and she's crazy, and having fun, and I'd rather play with her than get my sermon ready. Oh, yeah. There are things that I love more than God. Jesus says that's not how it's supposed to be. How about you? Are there things that you love more than God? It better not be going to Walmart, because that's not one thing we can love. We all have things that we love that are in a way of us loving God. That's the uncomplicated truth, though, that Jesus asks us to love nothing more than we love God. Jesus tells us today that the simple truth of our lives and our world is that we should love God more than anything else. But have you ever met a person who you've known as a God-fearing person who doesn't love their family? Have you ever known someone who reads the Bible every day, who's really good to their family and is a jerk to everybody else? Do you know anyone like that? You can't do it, can you? If you love God, what does God's love do to you? It pours out. If you love yourself, what happens? You're a jerk. You're horrible. You're selfish. And God asks you, don't love anything more than you love me. Seems kind of simple, doesn't it? But how simple is it really? It's kind of a complicated thing when we try and do it in real life, because our lives are complicated. They're crazy and messy and sometimes very, very complicated. Now, you all are here tonight because you know a little bit about Jesus, right? Maybe a little bit. Sometimes I feel like I only know this tiny bit about Jesus, and I know what he's done for me. Your lives are simple a little bit each day because you know of what Jesus has done for you. Am I right? Imagine people who live their lives in pain and sorrow and everyday complication and craziness without knowing Jesus. What do they do with their time? Because I know when my life is complicated, when I'm feeling down and stressful, I'm like, Jesus, you got to help me. I can't make it. I know when I've got problems with my own personality and things at church or whatever, and I'm praying to God and I'm talking to my wife saying, I don't know what to do. And Jesus says, here am I. You're forgiven. Try again the next day. Imagine people who live their lives, complicated, crazy, painful, sorrowful lives, who don't know Jesus. Is that simple or complicated? It's pretty complicated for them. And then Jesus does this to us. He says, whoever does not take up the cross and follow me isn't worthy of me. If your first concern is to look after yourself, and you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. There are people in this world who don't know Jesus. Even in Elto, there are people who don't know Jesus. Even in Brandon or Waupun or even in the areas around us, there are people who don't know Jesus. They don't know what he's done for them. And their lives are complicated just like ours. But we have Jesus, who gives us peace when we need it, who gives us forgiveness when we've screwed up so many times that we don't deserve it. When we feel like we're not good people, Jesus tells us our worth because of his death on the cross. And there are people who don't know that. Whoever does not take up the cross and follow me isn't worthy of me. Are you taking up your cross?